I was folding the same dish rag for the third time when the knock came. Slow, certain, like it knew me. The kind of sound that didn't ask permission so much as announce it was coming in anyway. Wind clawed through the cracks in the window frame, and for a heartbeat I thought it was just the storm teasing me. But then it came again, heavier this time. 3 knocks, each one meaning something I didn't yet understand. I wiped my palms on my skirt and opened the door. He stood there in a snow-flecked coat, hat brim dripping meltwater down the side of his face. Coulter Grady, though I didn't know his name yet, looked more like a man carved out of weather than born of it. He tipped his hat, eyes kind but measuring. "Ma'am," he said, "you the one they call Miss Mayburn?" I nodded, too aware of how the wind pushed at my dress, how the hem brushed my ankles. I'd built my life on small movements, making myself take up less space than I did. He went on, "I'm looking for a cook. Lost mine to marriage and better prospects. Got 20 men needing meals at Grady Ranch out past the creek. Thought you might be interested." He said it plain, but I heard the unspoken. If you're capable. If you can be around men who'll test you. My heart pounded in my throat like it wanted out. I'd cooked for families before, until they decided I drew too much pity to keep around. My last employer's wife had said I made the kitchen look crowded. I'd laughed, but that laughter was still stuck somewhere in me, unspent. "I'm not sure," I began, voice wobbling. "Folks don't usually want—" He lifted his chin, waiting. "No one marries a fat girl, sir," I blurted out before I could stop myself. My cheeks burned so hot they could have thawed the snow between us. He blinked, slow, like a man weighing truth instead of insult. "Didn't ask for a wife," he said softly. "Ask for a cook. Can you cook?" Silence stretched, the kind that tests who you are. I looked at my hands, calloused, steady, and thought of the way butter hissed when it met a hot pan, how dew felt alive under my palms, and how I could feed men who'd never remember my name but always remember the taste. "Yes," I said, "I can cook." Something flickered behind his eyes, not pity, not amusement, respect maybe, or curiosity. He nodded once, then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a scrap of folded paper. "Sun up tomorrow. Bring what you need. You'll have board and pay." He left it at that, turned and started toward his horse, tethered by the fence. I stood in the doorway watching his boots sink into the snow until he disappeared in the pale distance. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart thundering. The silence in my cabin seemed louder now, filled with the echo of a man's voice saying, "Can you cook?" I'd spent years shrinking from questions like that, years surviving on crumbs of worth. But this one felt different, like a challenge. I looked down at the note in my hand. A smudge of his fingerprint darkened the corner. I didn't know if I'd just opened the door to ruin or redemption, but I knew I'd opened it. And come sunrise, I'd walk through it.
By sunrise, the ranch hands were quiet, mouths full of the food they'd mocked. But it hadn't started that way. When I arrived at Grady Ranch, the frost was still clinging to the horse rails, and the air smelled like iron. The bunkhouse sprawled low against the hill, smoke limping out the chimney. 20 men looked up as I crossed the yard, faces carved by weather and work. "Guess Grady hired us a biscuit barrel," one called. Another laughed. "Hope she rolls faster than she walks." I pretended not to hear. Pretending had been my armor for years, but I felt the words, every one, settle in me like stones in a bucket. Coulter appeared from the barn, his hat pulled low. "That'll do," he said, voice even but sharp enough to slice through their laughter. "She's the cook. You'll eat what she makes or go hungry. Either way, we'll see who lasts longer." The men quieted, but their smirks stayed. Inside the kitchen, the air was colder than outside. The stove had gone cold overnight. I built the fire from scratch. Dry bark, one careful match. My fingers shook as the flame caught, not from fear, but from something hungrier, the need to prove myself to no one but me. By dawn's full light, the first pan hissed. Cornmeal, lard, molasses. Nothing fancy, just honest food. The smell of cornbread rose and wrapped the air like a prayer. They came in, one by one, shoulders brushing the doorframe. No one spoke. They took plates, testing bites like it might betray 'em. Then something happened I hadn't expected. Silence. The kind of silence that means something. It's working. The men looked at each other, then back to me. One muttered, "Ain't bad." Another added, "Hell, that's good." I didn't smile. Not yet. I was too busy trying not to shake. Coulter leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Told you she could cook," he said. Their laughter had burned itself out, replaced by the quiet rhythm of forks scraping tin plates. I stood at the stove, turning the next batch, and felt heat bloom in my chest that had nothing to do with fire. When the meal was done, the men drifted out, some tipping their hats, others mumbling thanks. That was all I needed. Coulter stayed behind. "You handled that well," he said. "I handled the food," I replied. "The men'll follow that." He smiled, small, almost secret. That's the truth. After he left, I sat down at the table, my hands still smelling of smoke and flour. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I'd fed 20 men and turned mockery into silence, not by fighting, but by feeding. Outside, wind swept across the prairie, lifting the smell of cornbread into the cold. I thought about how fragile belonging was, like dough before it rises. But maybe, just maybe, I'd given it a start. Still, part of me knew the test wasn't over. Respect born from hunger can vanish by supper. I leaned toward the fire, listening to it crackle, and whispered to myself, "You'll stay, not to prove, to belong." Then came a soft knock at the kitchen door. Not Coulter's, not one of the men. A woman's voice, low, hesitant, said, "You Miss Mayburn?" And just like that, the warmth of my new place flickered.
She was the ranch laundress, Lena, small and sharp-featured, eyes quick with questions she didn't quite ask. "The men say you made cornbread softer than clouds," she said. "Could use a hand with starching if you've got the time." It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but an introduction drawn in practical terms. The women out here didn't waste words on friendship. You earn that slow. So I scrubbed, cooked, listened. Winter pinned the valley under white weight.
The man rose before dawn, came in half frozen, and left again to wrestle cattle or mend fences. My kitchen became their pulse. Firelight, the smell of beans and bacon, coffee that could wake the dead. Coulter Grady started staying behind after meals. At first I thought he was inspecting, making sure I hadn't spoiled anything. But then I noticed. He rolled up his sleeves, dipped his hands in the wash basin, and began to rinse the dishes I'd dirtied. "The boss washing for the cook," I said once, trying to make it a joke. He shrugged. "Figure we both work better with clean hands." No one had ever stood beside me without needing something. His silence didn't press. It steadied. We didn't speak much, didn't have to. The scrape of tin plates, the clink of spoons, the whistle of the kettle, those became our sentences. I learned the language of his quiet, the way he'd clear his throat before asking nothing at all, the way his shoulders eased when he smelled cinnamon or fresh coffee. Sometimes when I caught him looking at me, he'd look away quick, not from shame, but from something gentler. One evening, after the men had gone to bed and the fire was dying low, I asked, "Why stay?" He paused, the dish rag hanging limp in his hands. "Been years since this place sounded like home," he said. "You make it sound like home." I didn't know how to answer that. Compliments were foreign currency to me, valuable but dangerous. I busied myself wiping the counter until my hands stilled. He set a mug in front of me, coffee gone lukewarm. "Drink before it gets colder," he said. We sat there, neither drinking. The lantern between us sputtered, throwing light that made the walls seem alive. For a long time I watched him. The lines at his eyes, the scar along his jaw, the gentleness trying to live beneath all that grit. When he left, he paused at the door. "You're doing fine work, Miss Mayburn." The way he said it, slow, certain, landed deeper than praise, like a promise I didn't ask for but maybe needed. That night I lay awake in the small room off the kitchen, listening to the wind drum against the shutters. The ranch creaked and breathed like some big animal at rest. I thought of his hands in the dishwater, the way steam curled between us. I didn't know it yet, but the quiet we'd built would soon be broken by a sound I'd never forget.
The blizzard came fast, like a punishment. By nightfall, the wind screamed against the windows and the world outside turned to white fury. The man had barely managed to get the last of the horses into the barn before the drift swallowed the fences. I was kneading dough when the sound came, faint, then sharper. A cry. Not wind, not coyote. A child. At first, I thought the storm was playing tricks, but then I heard it again, high, desperate, cutting through the howl. I dropped the bowl, grabbed a lantern, and threw on my coat. Coulter caught me at the door. "What in God's name are you doing?" I said, "There's a child out there." "You think there's a child," he corrected, grabbing his coat. "I heard one." He hesitated for half a breath, then nodded. "Stay close." The storm nearly tore the lantern from my hands. We pushed against the wind, our boots sinking deep. Snow lashed our faces until I couldn't tell breath from frost. I kept listening, straining past the roar. Then, through the madness, came a soft sob. "There!" I shouted, pointing toward the creek's edge. Coulter moved first, breaking trail. When he stopped, I saw what he saw. A bundle half buried in snow. A boy, no older than 6, his face pale as milk. I dropped to my knees, brushing snow from his cheeks. His lips were blue, his lashes crusted with ice. "Please,"
he whispered. Instinct took over. I pulled him to my chest, wrapping him in my coat. "You're all right now," I murmured, even though I wasn't sure he was. Coulter lifted him into his arms. He said, "Back to the house, now." We fought the storm all the way home. I remember the lantern flame dying, the dark pressing in, and the sound of my own breath rasping like an animal's. When we burst through the door, the men jumped to their feet. "Hot water?" I barked. "Blankets!" No one argued. They moved like soldiers. I stripped off the boy's wet clothes, rubbed his arms, his legs, anything to keep him from slipping away. His small chest shuddered beneath my hands. Coulter knelt beside me, his face drawn tight. "He must have wandered from one of the mining camps," he said. "They're scattered down the ridge." "Then we'll send for 'em in the morning," I said, voice hoarse. The boy stirred, opening his eyes, gray like storm clouds thinning. "Mama," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "She's coming, sweetheart. You rest." When he drifted into sleep, I finally looked at Coulter. His hair was soaked, his eyes red from wind and worry. For the first time, I saw the weight he carried, the loneliness that matched my own. He reached over and laid a hand on mine. "You saved him," he said. "Maybe," I said, "but the storm's not done yet." Thunder cracked outside, not from the sky, but from somewhere near the barn. The men shouted, and Coulter's face went white. "The roof," he said. "It's given way." He was out the door before I could stop him. I ran after, the boy's faint breathing still in my ears. The night swallowed him whole. And for the second time that evening, I stepped into the storm, this time not to find a child, but to keep a man from being lost.
By the time the thaw came, the ranch was different. The boy, whom we came to call Samuel, had survived the storm. Coulter built him a bed in the loft, and I kept him fed until color returned to his cheeks. The men started calling me Miss Edie, their tone stripped of mockery. Life settled back into rhythm until the stagecoach came up the road one bright afternoon. I was hanging laundry when the dust plume rose, and by the time the wheels stopped, I knew peace was about to end. She stepped down like she owned the ground, tall, dressed in violet, her gloves cleaner than truth. Carolyn Prescott, the one who'd left Coulter years before for a merchant's money in Cheyenne. I knew her by the way he froze when he saw her. "Coulter," she said, voice sweet as spoiled fruit, "you're hard to find these days." He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to me, then back to her. "Didn't know you were looking." "I came to look after what I left behind," she said, smile tight. "Your ranch seems to have changed hands, or kitchens." Her gaze landed on me like a blade. I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded politely. "Ma'am." She tilted her head, inspecting me as if I were something she'd scraped from her boot. "So, this is your cook." Coulter's jaw worked. "This is Miss Mayburn." "Miss Mayburn," she repeated, savoring it. "You must have strong arms feeding all these men, though it seems you feed yourself first." The laughter from the bunkhouse stopped cold. My stomach dropped, but I didn't move. Coulter took a step forward. "Carolyn," he said quietly, "that's enough." She smirked. "Oh, don't be sensitive, darling. I'm only teasing, though I can't imagine what you two talk about over supper. Recipes or repentance?" The words hit harder than any slap. I turned, headed for the kitchen, each step heavier than the last. Inside, the smell of coffee and flour turned sour in my throat. I'd worked so hard to be seen for what I could do, not how I looked,
and in a few careless sentences she dragged me back to the mud I'd climbed from. Outside, voices rose, Coulter's sharp, hers brittle, then silence. The door opened, and he filled the frame, face flushed with anger I'd never seen on him. "She's gone, took her coach and her poisoned tongue with her." I didn't turn around. "She's right about one thing," I whispered. "I don't belong beside you." He moved closer. "You belong right where you are." I shook my head. "Coulter, you don't have to defend me. It's only made worse by—" "Stop," he said, voice breaking. "Carolyn left for money. You stayed for heart." That pulled the breath right out of me. He wasn't a man for speeches. He just said truth like it was wood and iron, plain, solid, built to last. I turned then, meeting his eyes. For the first time, I didn't see pity there. I saw choice. But before I could answer, Samuel's small voice called from the doorway, "Mr. Grady, the horses are loose." Coulter spun, cursing under his breath, and ran toward the corral. I followed, skirts flying. The sun glared off the fence posts, and in the distance I saw the gate swinging open, 3 horses bolting toward the ridge. The storm in my chest hadn't passed. It had only changed shape.
It started with Samuel's cough, just a whisper of sound over the rattle of dishes, but by sundown it had spread through the bunkhouse like wind over grass. Fever, the kind that took men down faster than bullets. By the second night, 4 ranch hands were laid out, sweat-soaked and trembling. The doctor from town came, sniffed the air, muttered something about lung fever, and left before dark, saying he'd return if he could. He didn't. So it was me and Coulter and 20 men slipping between breath and prayer. I boiled water until the stove begged for mercy, washed faces, mixed herbs, pressed cold rags against foreheads. My arms burned, my dress stiff with sweat. The air smelled of sickness and wood smoke, and the night stretched longer than any winter. Coulter stayed near the doorway, helpless in the way strong men are when strength won't help. "You need to rest," he said. I wrung out another cloth. "Rest is for the living. We're not there yet." He tried to argue, but I'd already turned away. I'd never had children, but that week I learned the sound of them dying, grown men gasping like boys lost in dark dreams. On the 3rd night, the fever took Samuel. His small body went rigid, eyes wide and glassy. I held him against me, rocking, whispering the same useless comfort I'd once whispered to myself. "You're all right now. You're safe." Coulter knelt beside me, his face streaked with sweat and grief. "He's burning up, Edie. He won't make it." "Yes, he will," I snapped. "He has to." I don't remember falling asleep, only waking on the floor beside the cot, my body shaking, breath shallow. Coulter's hands were on my shoulders. "You've got the fever," he said. "I can still stand," I lied, pushing him away. But when I tried, my knees buckled. He caught me, strong arms that smelled of smoke and worry. "That's enough," he said. "You've kept us all breathing. Now it's my turn." He carried me to the kitchen like I weighed nothing at all, laid me near the stove, and pulled the blanket over me. My head spun, heat flashing cold, cold flashing fire. I drifted in and out, voices blending, time folding. Sometimes I saw him beside me, washing my face with a damp cloth, whispering, "If you're the hearth, I'll be the roof." I wanted to answer, but my throat was a desert. I could only hear the steady rhythm of his voice, the scrape of his boots on the floor, the stubborn pulse of life that refused to quit. When the fever finally broke, The first thing I saw was him asleep in a chair, hat tilted forward, his hand still holding mine. Outside, the wind had gone still. The world felt emptied, rinsed clean. Samuel's breathing came soft from the next room. He'd lived. Most of the men had too. Coulter woke with a start, blinking at me like I'd come back from somewhere far. "You scared the hell out of me," he said. "I look worse than you do," I rasped. He smiled, that slow, steady kind that only shows when the worst is past. For the first time since I'd come to Powder Creek, I let someone hold me without fear of being broken. But comfort, like fever, never lasts long. By the next week, the world would come knocking again, this time not for help, but for thanks, and I wasn't sure I knew how to be seen that way.
The first morning I stood on my feet without swaying, the men lined up outside the kitchen. No jokes, no swagger, just quiet eyes and hands twisting their hats. Coulter said nothing, only nudged me toward the door. "Go on," he whispered. I stepped outside, squinting against the sun. The ground had thawed, and the world smelled of damp earth and beginnings. One of the hands, Jeb, the loudest of 'em all, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, "we got something for you." He held out a parcel wrapped in rough cloth, tied with twine. My fingers trembled as I untied it. Inside was an apron, green, made from the leftover canvas of a wagon tarp, hem-stitched in uneven thread. Across the chest they'd scrawled, "Keeper of Home's Taste." Beneath the words, 20 signatures, even Samuel's, crooked but proud. For a long moment, I couldn't see for the tears. I don't know what to say," I managed. Coulter stepped closer. "You already said it," he whispered. "Every meal you made, every night you stayed up tending the sick, that was your saying." The men shuffled their feet, embarrassed by my crying. Jeb coughed into his sleeve. "We figured it was about time this place had a title fit for the heart of it." Heart. Not cook. Not woman too big for the doorway. Heart. I pressed the apron to my chest, feeling its rough fabric against my skin. I'd spent years hiding from the world's eyes, and now 20 of them looked at me with something close to reverence. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "You boys better not expect me to go easy on the portions now." That broke the tension. Laughter rolled like thunder, warm and harmless. Later, after they'd gone back to work, I found myself alone in the kitchen again. The air hummed with quiet, the kind that feels like prayer. I hung the apron by the window where the morning light could find it. Coulter came in, hat in hand. "You look right in that sunlight," he said softly. I laughed. "Don't start with poetry, Grady. It doesn't suit a man who still burns the biscuits when I'm not here." He stepped closer, the smell of saddle soap and cedar clinging to him. "Maybe I burn 'em on purpose, so you've got reason to stay." My heart caught in my throat, but before I could answer, Samuel burst through the door, waving a folded letter. "A man from town brought this, says it's for Miss Mayburn." I wiped my hands and took it. The paper was creased, ink smudged from travel. Inside, a girl's handwriting read, "Dear Miss Mayburn,
I heard you cook for men who once laughed at you. How do you make them see you different? No signature, just that question, like an echo from my younger self. I folded the letter and looked out the window. The prairie stretched wide and golden, endless as forgiveness. I'll need paper, I said quietly. Coulter raised a brow. To write her back? Yes, I said, fingers brushing the apron's stitched words. To tell her how to start her own fire.
A year later, the Grady ranch smelled different, sweeter somehow. Not just of horses and sweat, but of yeast, beans, and sunlight on iron. What had once been a bunkhouse kitchen now had shelves, painted walls, and a sign above the door that read, "Powder Creek Table, all are fed." The name was Coulter's, but the heart of it was mine. The men had built it together, board by board, hammering through laughter. Samuel, taller now, painted the trim a bright blue and left his palm print over the door. I never had the heart to wipe it away. We served travelers passing through, ranch hands from miles around, anyone hungry enough to knock. I'd cook, Coulter would wash. It became our rhythm, the one the world had once said didn't belong. That afternoon I sat by candlelight, a pot of beans simmering, the letter from that young girl unfolded beside me. She'd written again, said she still couldn't make her mother's boarders look her in the eye. She wrote, "They see my size before they see me. How do I change that?" The question hurt in the tender way truth does. I thought of my first morning here, the laughter, the shame, the walls I'd built. Then I dipped my pen in ink and began to write. Dear child, you don't change how they see you. You change how you see you. Don't wait to be chosen. Choose yourself first. Feed others, yes, but feed your own soul too. Love doesn't start with a man or a mirror. It starts when you pick up the spoon again after the world tells you to drop it. I paused, smiling at the ink blot forming on the corner. Coulter came in, wiping his hands on a towel. "Writing to that girl again?" "Yes," I said, sealing the letter. "She reminds me of someone." He grinned. "Someone who once told me no one would marry her." "And was she right?" I teased. He leaned against the counter, thinking. "She was wrong about what she was worth. The rest don't much matter." I turned back to the stove, hiding the warmth rising to my cheeks. The beans hissed, the scent of pepper and molasses filling the air. Outside, the men called it Miss Edie's house. Inside, I called it home. When the mail rider came, I handed him the envelope, then turned to the shelf above the stove. The old iron pot, the one from my cabin at Powder Creek, sat there still, blackened and sturdy. Next to it hung the green apron, its stitched words faded but legible. Keeper of home's taste. Coulter touched the apron string, his rough fingers brushing mine. "You ever miss the quiet days?" he asked. I looked around, at the laughter through the walls, the steady warmth of the fire, the life I'd built one meal at a time. "No," I said. The quiet had nothing to say. He smiled, and for a while we worked in silence, the kind that meant peace, not distance. When I finally sat down that night, the lantern low and the world still,
I thought of that girl waiting somewhere for my words. I hoped she'd hear 'em the way I meant 'em, not as advice, but as permission. Because I'd learned something out here on this wind-bitten edge of the world. The hardest love to earn is your own, and the truest homes are the ones you build from scratch.